Hey everybody. I'm Tucker. She's Julia.
Hello.
Yeah, if you forget, she's the one, red hair. I'm the guy. So, I figured we just would start off a little bit. I'm assuming that since you've come out tonight, that you already know how awesome Black as a Color is, and so we will talk more in detail about that awesomeness in just a few minutes. But before that, I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how you got involved in comics in the first place, because like we were speaking earlier, and I just think it's kind of interesting that your trajectory is maybe not what people used to think the normal trajectory of people getting into alt comics, and which is kind of what we would define Black as a Color as, broadly.
Let's see. Well, when I was a kid, I drew a lot, like you do, and that was kind of the thing that was like my thing. But I wrote a lot too. I wrote a lot of fiction, and when I was a kid, I wanted to be an Egyptologist very badly. And then when I got into high school, I realized didn't have any talent for science, and I was like, fuck this dream. And
how early did you abandon that dream?
I think I was about 15.
Oh, 15. Okay, well that's fine. No, it's not. I had a vision of like a 7-year-old being like, no, fuck that.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I was a very bleak 7-year-old, but not about Egyptology.
Okay.
And so then I decided that the only other thing that I wanted to be good at was drawing really well, and so I started looking at art schools. And I decided to major in illustration because when you look online at like the portfolios of the different majors, those were the ones that had the really beautiful drawings in them. So I majored in illustration at Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle, and then it was very commercial focused, and I started getting really into like contemporary fine art, and so I graduated with a fine art major in painting and printmaking. But I took, like, Ellen Forney taught a comics class at Cornish, and I took that for 2 semesters. So I was kind of like making mini comics on the side a little bit. She had like you had to do mini comics for projects and stuff.
Did she single you out?
No.
Ellen Forney, Marbles is her most recent book that came out. But did she notice? Was she like, oh, you?
I did not have any gift for comics at that time. They're very earnest comics about like Saint Francis of Assisi. Like, I think my final project the first semester was just like a straight retelling of one of the stories from the Little Flowers of Saint Francis, and it was it's maudlin. It's so.
I think you're in good company with maudlin student projects, though.
Yeah, well, but yeah, I saw her recently last year when I was in Seattle for a short run, and she did not recognize me. I was like, Ellen, it's so great to see you. I thought she was going to be like, you were my star pupil. She was like, your name starts with a J. It was disappointing a little bit. But
when you say, well, I just want to touch, because that's something I'm always curious about, is at the time you're going to Cornish, and it's like a commercial program. They're like, we're going to make you an illustrator, and then you're going to go out, and you're going to get a job, and you're going to illustrate, you're
right.
You're
the projects are like, design a logo for a bank, design a sign for a juice bar, and it was very discouraging.
Is there pushback when you say, when they start to realize, like, oh, this is not, like, San Francisco of Assisi is not going to sell, like, Coke and Nike and stuff like that. Is there pushback, or are they just kind of like, I just let the red-haired girl do what she wants to do?
No. They were very disappointed in me, I think. I think that most of the feedback that I got on my projects, like there was one project where we had to design you had to redesign the cover of a book that you like, and I redesigned The End of the Affair by Graham Greene, which is a wonderful book. And I drew this really gnarly Pietà for the cover, and my teacher was just like, I don't know. I don't know about this. Usually they would be like, can you make it more corporate? Can you make the lines cleaner? So one of my teachers actually told me, like, this would work if you put some like little silhouetted men with briefcases in it. It's not.
So it's viewing art as like there's no stop. It's like, we're gonna look at art and we're gonna be like, how is this gonna sell something immediately? Like, make it commercial as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it was. Well, the illustration program was part of the design curriculum. Like, there are 6 different areas of art at Cornish. There's music, dance, performance, production, fine art, design, Is that one more, or are there only 5? Anyway, so that was in the design, which is totally separate from the art area. So it was very like get a job focused.
So how'd that transition into comics?
Well, it's funny. I got very gung-ho about art and decided that I was going to have a fine art career. And so I did that a bit when I was in Seattle after I graduated. I had some art shows and galleries and stuff. And it wasn't... I think the work that I was making was good, but maybe not going to cut it. Like, I don't know if... It's easy to say now. I don't know if I could have had a fine art career.
Right.
And that's partly because it was always very narrative, and that's a little, it turns people off in fine art. I mean, it turns me off in other people's fine art too. It feels like it's holding your hand too much, maybe. And the freestanding image wasn't my thing so much. Like I made a lot of collections of images. Like usually I would have a show, and it would be like I had a show that was the 40 Martyrs of England and Wales, which are people who were 40 people whose names they know, chosen to represent about 300 people who were killed, Catholics who were killed under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, I guess. Anyway, so I did a bunch of portraits of people as these individuals, so it's like a series, and it has like a story.
Yeah.
And it was a little too on the nose, maybe.
So you're organically creating comics without even the intent of creating comics.
It was always a series like that with me. And there was always, even in fine art, I was always getting that feedback that it was too narrative. And when it was time to do we all got to have a postcard for our BFA show where it has a photo of your work and your name, and it looks very professional. And my thesis advisor was like, you have all these books in your studio because every time I talk to you about your work, you're like, oh, well, read this thing from Le Morte d'Arthur and read this thing from Suetonius. And she was like, you should just put a photo of all your books on your postcard. And I was like, fuck you. That's not the point.
I'm somebody who's kind of a nerd for like old school comics interviews and stuff like that. Like, how did these people like get started and that kind of thing. And I know you can't tell that by what an amazing interviewer I am, but
they're going to find out.
But the thing, like, I don't know that I can remember reading about somebody who's just organically come to comics without saying like, I'm gonna like, you're saying like I had to tell stories, so I was trying to do it through spot images, and then it just kind of transitioned, and it was like, okay, these things have to come together. Yeah,
that's entirely accurate. I didn't really think about it until just now, how it's actually a pretty direct journey, because when I was taking comics classes at Cornish, I didn't really feel like I was very good at it. I don't think anybody thought I was very good at it. But I
think that's, traditionally comics classes, my understanding of traditional comics academia may have changed, but my understanding is that it's always been, it's like they sit down with students, and instead of saying like, this is how you transition to become a great cartoonist, they produce things that are like these finished, accepted, like great pieces of work. And then they don't tell you anything about how that person got there. It's like I recently saw a syllabus of like a comics class.
Yeah.
And it's like every week is like this 20-year apex of a person's career piece of work. And it's like there's no story in there about like what did they do for those 20 years? What kind of art were they making when they first got started? It's like you see like if you've never seen, like if you've seen Jimmy Corrigan or Building Stories or something like that, like that's one thing. You're like, oh yeah, how did he make that? It's like, yeah, but if you go look at Floyd Farland, which is this really hard, have you ever seen that? It's terrible. It's like legitimately bad, horrible work. And like he buys it up. Like if you try to buy it on eBay, Chris Ware's like bidding against you to buy it so he can destroy it. And I found this thing in like a superhero store.
That's going to be me with my St. Francis comic.
There you go. Exactly. Like it's one of those things where like if you don't show somebody how that transition happens, people look at comics and go like, well, they must have been doing that when they were 15.
Right. Well, they are now.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
That's Sam Alden. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, it's when people make comics, like you have to draw the same thing over and over again so much that the style becomes very refined, and it has like a, you wonder how somebody got so solid with it.
It becomes their penmanship, yeah. Yeah.
So it
like if you don't know how to,
see more early work for sure.
Yeah, if you don't know how to make an eye,
Yeah.
you're going to be in serious trouble because you got to draw a lot of them.
You're going to find out fast.
Yeah. Okay. So let's jump. So and then you started meeting cartoonists. That's
right.
When did you move? You moved to Portland
in 2007.
2007. Okay.
So I was kind of having shows in galleries and stuff, and I had made like mini comics once in a while just for fun, and I like consigned them at what's the place that used to be in Seattle, Confounded Books, and a couple places in Olympia, and then when I moved to Portland, I took the bus there, or the train, I guess, from Olympia to Portland, and then immediately I had signed up for something that I found on Craigslist, like where artists were doing chalk drawings in Pioneer Square. So I walked from the bus station to Pioneer Square, and to get there I walked past the Everett Station lofts and saw that there was a comics shop there. So a couple days later I went in with this comic that I'd made, a different comic about St. Francis of Assisi, a better one.
Refinement.
Yes.
Yes.
I always go back to St. Francis. And Dylan Williams was working there. He was a member of, it was Pony Club. He was a member of Pony Club at that time, and he read the comic. He was really into it. We had this like 2-hour conversation about martyrs and like demonology and 60s spy shows. He's a big Patrick McGowan fan, and so am I. And I was like thrilled to meet him, and he was like,
did you know who Dylan Williams was?
Oh, no.
No, okay.
I didn't know anything about anything. So he was essentially my first friend in Portland, and he was like, oh, well, Stumptown Comics Fest is coming up, and I was really into Al Columbia and still am. And he was like, oh, Al Columbia's in town, I'll introduce you to him. And I was like, okay. So I came to Stumptown. He introduced me to a bunch of people. I met Jesse Reclaw, who used to have like a monthly drawing night. So then that was how I made most of my friends. All my friends were immediately comics people, and they were like, oh, you made a comic and you're good at drawing, like you should make more comics. Everybody in Portland is very inclusive, so they were like, oh, I'm doing an anthology, I'm looking for something to publish, you should make something. And so I got all this positive feedback for it. And meanwhile, everybody that I was dealing with in this like very low rung of the fine art world was really flaky and difficult, and I wasn't selling a lot of work, so I was like, fuck it, comics. And
it didn't sound like you had much of a choice, though. It sounds like comics was going to get you.
It sounds like a foregone conclusion now.
Yeah. It's like you're making stuff, it has to be comics. You walk into a place, it's like, oh, there's Dylan Williams.
Yeah, oops.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a great person for me to meet. That was he was a really big deal in my life. And it was because of Dylan that I made Flesh and Bone.
Does everybody here know what Flesh and Bone is? You can respond, it's okay. Yes, Flesh and Bone. Flesh and Bone is like a fist-pumping comic. Like, if you haven't seen it, it's amazing. You have to find Flesh and Bone.
Thank you very much.
Flesh and Bone was how I first found out about Julia's work. Flesh and Bone is one of those kind of comics that you see it, and you're just like, okay, other people have to see this because I can't be the only person who knows about this. Like, it's not one of those things that you're like, oh, I don't want this to get popular so everybody else gets into it. It's like you read it and you're like, okay, this has to, like, you want to be out in the street showing it off. Like, that's how great Flesh and Bone is.
I'm glad you said it and not me.
Nah, no, well, I kind of wish you had said it because it would have been.
I'm not good at that kind of thing.
All right, so Flesh and Bone.
Yeah, so in like spring of 2009, Dylan calls me up and he's like, look, I want you to write a book for Sparkplug to publish, because he had been distroing some mini comics that I had made. And so he was like, the comics that I had made were, because I wasn't really taking it seriously or considering it my like primary thing, they were very, like, I wouldn't do any pencils. I would just like kind of draw it kamikaze style, and it would come out however. And they were really silly or lighter. They were. I did this series called Ariadne of Naxos, which is basically just me hanging out with like Doctor Who and Gilgamesh and Enkidu and Lancelot and basically whoever it is that I like. And I get killed at one point, and I'm a ghost for a long time, and I think like Pyramid Head rips my skin off and stuff like that. And he was like, look, Julia, like, I think you can do better than this. He said it in a really nice way because Dylan was an incredibly tactful person when he wanted to be. And he was like, look, I want you to do some pencils. I want you to take your time with the drawings. I want you to write the story first before you draw it. I want it to be about 40 pages long, black and white, 6x9. And I was like, okay, Dylan, whatever you say. So I did that, and it was funny because it wasn't until I got off the phone with him that I was like, fuck you, Dad, what? But yeah, so I did that, and I wrote it with all the things in it that I knew that Dylan and I both loved, like the witchcraft and the tragic love story, stuff like that. I wrote it for him, and when he was like very hands-off as an editor, and I was like, I want you to meet with me, like I thumbnailed out this whole thing, I want to show it to you and make sure we're on the right track. And he was like, well, I'm not really going to tell you what to do, I trust you to make a great book. And I was like, please just look at it, like reassure me. So we went out for tea. Dylan was a big tea drinker, and so am I. And I showed him the book. I had it in a portfolio that I was working on, and so I opened it up and I was like, okay, so it starts out with a black mass. And he shut the book and pushed it across the table and said, okay, sold. So I wrote it, and I kind of, we published it, I think, for Stumptown the following year, and I didn't think that it would be a big deal. I figured it would be like my previous like mini comics where like all my friends would be like, oh yeah, great job, Juge, and then we would forget about it. But it was nominated for an Ignatz Award, and they sent me an email about it, and I was like, what does this mean? Like I was at work, and I was working at that time with a friend of mine who's also a comics person, Cameron Hockey. Okay. And I was like, I just got an email that says I was nominated for an Ignatz Award, and he was like, that's a really big deal, Julia, that's awesome. Okay.
If you win an Ignatz Award, they give you a brick, like just a legit brick.
They throw it at your head, which is what you deserve.
Yes, because that means that they love you.
Yes. Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
So it was nominated for an Ignatz Award. It was they put part of it in Best American Comics, which was funny because they accidentally cut off the last page of it. And they put the first 10 pages of it, and if you've read Flesh and Bone, the first 10 pages of it is like there's this black mass, and then the guy comes to talk with the witch, and then he goes to his dead girlfriend's grave and masturbates. So the last page of the 10 pages would have been him like ejaculating on the grave, and but that part was cut off, and there was a review of that edition of Best American Comics that was like, everything in this is good except for Julia Gfrörer's piece, which is anticlimactic. That's so true.
That's the best bad review you could ever get, though.
It was beautiful.
That's somebody who truly understood that comic.
And then I got a really nice email from Alison Bechdel, who was the guest editor of that edition, and she said, I was so sad that they cut your comic off because I really loved the part when the man ejaculates on the grave. Yes. Alison Bechdel liked my cum shot. I'll put that on my resume.
That's pretty much all you need on your resume.
I know. Yeah. That's just what it says in big, like 72
Is that how you got the
point
Fantagraphics deal?
Yes.
Yeah, Black's just walked in and just set down a little card.
Alison Bechdel loved my cum shot. Give me money. That's what I say on street corners. So yeah, Flesh and Bone turned out to be a really big deal. It was there was an article in the Village Voice, not about that, but about like the best graphic novels of the year, and there was like maybe 10 of them, and one of them was mine. Somehow, I don't know how that happened. The person who wrote it, like, there was a paragraph about my book, and then the next paragraph was like, another book that was also great was Charles Burns's book this year. So that was
he got
nice.
The also consider line.
Yeah, also good.
Yeah.
As good as Julia's.
If you have time. After the one about the black mass and the masturbation.
I think mine was much shorter, so it's good to read that first.
So, black is a color. You want to talk a little bit about black as a color?
Sure, let's talk about it.
Yeah, all right. So
that's why we're here.
Have people read Black as a Color? Or are you just like your Black as a Color super fans?
We're going to spoil it for you.
Yeah, we're going to spoil it. Black as a Color is a pirate comic / mermaid
pirates.
Comic.
They're just
pirates.
sailors.
They're people they're pirates. If you're going to throw them off the boat, they're pirates.
Is that a pirate thing?
That's not how like regular merchant seamen handle business.
Is it not?
That's pirate business right there.
I have to. This is like the one and only time when I'm going to say I don't have any experience with seamen.
Oh.
No, I talked to 0 sailors. No, that's not true. I talked to 1 sailor. I talked to Lucy Bellwood.
Prior to or while making it?
Well, about the book because
Well, you did a lot of boat research.
Well, I looked at photos of boats.
That's boat research.
I wouldn't say that I achieved a deeper understanding of boats necessarily. I have some ideas about how they work. I know what the different masts are called. No, there's like a specific configurations of the different sails that have to occur for different types of weather and such. So I wrote to her because she has a bunch of experience sailing on tall ships for some reason. Apparently that's a thing. To find out. So there's like the scene with the electrical storm, and there's an authentic sail configuration.
Okay.
Which matters to me. I don't know if it matters to anybody else.
No, it's a good. I mean, it's going to matter. There's going to be. There's always somebody out there who really knows that stuff, and you don't want to get that email
That
where
person
they write in
yeah.
and go like, "Come on."
I talked to Todd Bach about that. I was like, no matter what I do, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a great deal of inauthenticity in the like sailor area. And he was like, you know, if somebody is going to give you shit for that, then fuck them. They shouldn't read your book. And you know, Todd Bach does a very historically accurate comic, so.
Oh no, I'm sure. If you've ever read his stuff, I'm sure he gets kind of nutso emails all the time.
I'm sure he gets nutso emails no matter what he does. I'm sure he sends them.
That's probably he probably sends as many as he gets to. So Black as a Color originally appeared on the study group website.
Yes.
Okay.
And that was I had written it. Do you want to talk about how I wrote it?
Is that because Zach came to you and he wanted you to write something for the study group?
He did. Zach and I have been friends for a long time. He was another one of my first Portland friends. And so he had emailed me asking me if there was something that I wanted to put up on study group and serialize. And I had a couple stories just on the back burner that I was working on. So I was like, okay, so I've got this book about medieval religious mysticism that I'm kind of thinking about, or I've got this one about like sailors and mermaids and stuff. And I kind of figured he would go for the sailors and mermaids one. I don't know. His wife has a big tattoo of a mermaid on her chest. I think
he has a big tattoo of an anchor.
That may be true.
Yeah.
So I figured he would go for it, and he did. And so yeah, we started publishing that on Study Group every Wednesday, which is apt. And that ran from, I want to say, May to November of 2012, something like that. And I drew it pretty much like as I had already written it, but it was like, you know, I think it was 2 pages a week. And so I would draw the 2 pages that week, or sometimes I would get a little ahead, but not too much. So it was good to have that regular deadline. But there was stuff that I did rush through, so I went back and touched it up for the Fantagraphics version. I drew a lot of backgrounds in there that I had skipped before, and put like wood grain on stuff that should have wood grain.
And you're drawing. This is all. Are you drawing a computer, or are you going pencils to inks? What are you doing?
No, the computer is involved very little in this process. The drawings are on 8.5 by 11, and I drew the panels ahead of time and Xeroxed them.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, just pencils and ink, and then scan.
Old school. So you can sell your originals and make that money.
I guess I could. That's a weird thing to think about, breaking up the book, isn't it?
You got to get that paper somehow.
I know, right?
You don't want to do a Black as a Color every year.
Don't I?
I don't know.
So yeah, it was on Study Group, and as I was publishing it online, I made mini comics. I made part 1 and part 2, so each of them is a little over 30 pages long. And the first one came out, I think, for the Zine Symposium, and must have been in August of that year. And then the second one, well, it must have been in November. It must have been for the Brooklyn show. Whatever that was called.
I was curious. Sorry, the Black as a Color is not as explicit as, like, sexually as some of your comics have been. You know, which I know if you've ever read an interview with Julia, and I've read them all, at some point everybody likes to go like, let's talk about cocks, let's talk about sex, because there's a lot of...
I get those people at my tables at conventions too.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's great.
Yeah. How do you handle that, actually? We'll come back to my topic. How do you handle it when people come up and they're like, let's just talk about dicks?
Oh, I'm a pro neg, or it's it's people are usually pretty responsive to being shut down by me. Just people are like, occasionally somebody will take issue with the way that I drew the cock because it doesn't look like theirs, I would assume.
Wow, I never thought of that before, but I guess some people are going to look at cocks and be like, that doesn't look like my cock.
Well, if they tell me like, oh, you drew it wrong, I'm like, no, you saw it wrong. But yeah, it's not. It's fine.
Was that a conscious thing? Was that was that you going to study
to make it less explicit?
To make it less explicit?
No.
Or was that just came out of the story? The story is not that story. That story is not explicit story.
Let me see. I think I didn't decide to make it cleaner. I think it's still pretty heavy. Mm-hmm. It's just there was no.
It's just a different kind of heavy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a time to put a bunch of cocks in. I think you see Warren's cock when he's masturbating in the boat at one point, and that's about it. I didn't want to show. I don't know if this came across to everybody, but my idea was that Warren and Eulalia had sex, and that I didn't want to show it because I didn't want to clarify how that would happen.
Yeah. I mean, there's that part when people bang mermaids where you're like, okay, so how's
that going to work?
What part do they bang?
I would prefer that remain mysterious, partly because it would kind of bring the story to a weird halt.
It would become
hey,
the thing
now we're going to explain it.
Yeah.
And then the part at the end as a ghost when he has sex with his wife, I didn't want to have to show how it was that he disappeared. Mm-hmm. And I also felt like this is such a sad and intimate moment that there needed to be a fade out.
Yeah.
Look at me being so respectful of my characters all of a sudden. It would have been nice to have a gnarly sex scene in there somewhere, but it just didn't fit.
I don't know. I mean, we have to open this up, but I did want to say, it does sound to me in some ways you're, I don't know, there's no, maybe this is the kind of thing I tell you later so I can be sentimental about it, but it does sound like your work tells you a little bit how to make it. Not that you're not responsible for it. At the end of the day, this stuff is not going to come out without you drawing it and you writing it. But the way you keep describing that, it does sound like it's a little bit it goes no, this time you don't need to do that. This time we are going to do that. We're going to go all the way. We're going to do the cum on the headstone. But other times it's no, this
that was very necessary.
Yeah.
That was one of the first images of the comic.
Flesh and bone.
Read it.
So let's open it up. Sorry if we ran a little long.
It's okay. I'm really excited to see how our video editor handles all the cock and cum shot talk tomorrow.
Is that?
No, it'll be
great.
He'll have to grapple with that, not me. But we are going to open it up to. It'll be fun. We're going to open it up to Q&A right now. If you guys have any questions for Julia, we'd love to take them. You can raise your hand. I'll bring you a mic. Anybody out there?
Guys, come on.
All right. 1 second. Oops, sorry.
So Julia, I've seen your inspiration Tumblr. And
Bloodhead.
Yeah, I think that every single time that I've looked at it, I don't think I've ever actually seen comics on there. Do you feel inspired by comics material at any point, or do you feel mostly inspired by the kind of art you were originally working on in the first place?
Well, I definitely feel inspired by everything that's on my inspiration Tumblr. There's once in a while there's comics on there, but I don't really read. I don't really read very many comics, which we were talking about this earlier. I don't know if that's bad. I feel guilty about being not so involved. It's not like I don't like comics when I read them, but it's not the thing that I get excited about reading. I read my friends' comics.
Yeah, you up until quite recently, you were in Portland, which is basically you don't have to read comics in Portland. You're just in comics. That is that scene.
Yes, we were eating and drinking it, wearing it, and breathing it.
Yeah, you're just around people who are just making it constantly, and there's it's a vibrant thing.
Right. So you read the comics when you're at the coffee shop with your 8 friends who are all drawing the comics. Mm-hmm. Most of the comics that I read are comics that people gave to me. People will either bring them to me at my table at a show, or my friends will give me the things that they work on. Mm-hmm. So Yeah, I guess I don't. I mean, there are comics that I've read and liked. But the thing with Bloodhead is like, that's where I put the stuff that I'm like, I could like manufacture an idea out of this. And that's not usually true of somebody else's fully formed story the way that it is of a singular image. So yeah, I would prefer to make comics out of non-comics things, I suppose.
Have you thought of doing anything super autobiographical, like Fun Home or?
No. I don't. I never really make autobiocomics. I've made like a couple, and they're always super gloomy. But I'm not super excited about people knowing a ton about my life, and it feels very like. I'm not super excited about making people listen to me talk about my life either. And I noticed that all the autobiocomics that I have done, I write them in the second person. So it's like I'm talking to myself, like, you decided to do this. And then you were like, what the hell is wrong with me? But I think about it, like I was asked to do a comic for this online magazine about being a mother called Mother. And I was like I'm trying to picture me writing a comic about what it's like for me to be a mother, and there's just I can't find a way into that. It's not nobody's fucking business.
Great. Does anyone else out there have questions this evening? You can certainly ask all your questions of Julia when she signs some books over here for us in just a few minutes. On behalf of the Strand, we're really thankful that all you guys came out tonight, and thank you especially to Julia and Tucker. Make sure you check out copies of Black is the Color if you haven't already. Buy some for your friends. Take care.